Welcome to Season 4 of the K4 Business Podcast.
So, a question for the audience. Are you tired of unpredictable sales and wondering why your revenue keeps spiking and crashing no matter how hard you work? That's exactly what our speaker will unpack today. He'll share how to build a reliable, math driven sales system that creates consistent growth, steadier cash flow, and more confident selling without the burnout. If this hits home, stay with us because Doug, our guest, will walk you through the mindset, systems, and simple steps that can help you double your sales with far less stress. Speaking of our guest, Doug Brown, CEO of CEO Sales Strategies. He is a leading expert in the sales, revenue, and profit growth, known for creating predictable math-based system that helps businesses and independent sellers reliably increase sales. Former military serviceman, he went on to serve as the independent president of sales and training for Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes, where he boosted team close rates by 143% and grew a product line by over 4,000% in just 6 months. Across his career, Doug has built or supported more than 35 businesses, helping generate over 960 million in sales for companies ranging from household brands like Intuit, CBS, and Procter and Gamble to thousands of entrepreneurs. He's earned top sales honors, led high-performing teams, and created award-winning development programs. Doug has also launched VidBitNo, a sales automation platform designed to increase conversions, retain clients, and help businesses double their sales through smarter follow-up and daily performance tracking. After 4 decades of mastering business growth and personal development, he continues to teach others how to win more clients with simple, measurable systems. He lives in New Hampshire and with his wife, 2 daughters, and outside of his business, he's a passionate musician who has even sold gear to artists like Aerosmith, the Eagles, and Boston. That is Doug. Wow, congrats! And that alone just kind of plucks my strings. Sir, welcome. Good to have you here.
Bernie, thank you. And Wayne, thank you for having me here. I'm very grateful to be here with you guys.
So, do you have a favorite quote or saying that you like to use?
I do. It's not always that positive, but it's like, every day you wake up, you have an opportunity, but usually what you want to do is going to take you twice as long or as you figure it's going to, that's, that's kind of my motto. Make room for it so you don't be stressed out throughout.
Perfect. So, you had a mindset shift for everything that generating predictable sales. What triggered that? Was it an epiphany where you're sitting there going, "What's going on? I don't understand," to, "Uh-huh."
Yeah, it was a little more, I think a little more aggressive than so. When you're working with high performers, they're looking for results very quickly, and I in my own business would do the same thing, and it wasn't coming as fast as I wanted it to, or sometimes even clients wanted it to, and then so you get to a real breaking point of frustration. But then what I started realizing was it's actually not the strategies or the information, the education, or even the application of the strategies. A lot of times within the sales team members or within the leadership or even within myself at the time when I was looking at my own businesses, I realized that there's something holding up that isn't actually mechanical. It's actually on the other side of the human being, which is a lot of people are locked up in their limbic system in their brain and they're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. And so I started doing a little research on there and I realized that the limbic system actually works a lot faster than the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And the prefrontal cortex is the reasoning side of our brain. But like the limbic system takes like 1/200th of a second to activate from stimulants, but it takes a second or two for the prefrontal cortex to kick in. So when we're constantly using the limbic system of our brain first, and we're really emphatic, like, I'm sure this is it. I'm absolutely positive this is it. We actually persuade our prefrontal cortex to agree with us. And this is what gets people into challenge mode. And a lot of this comes from their childhood stemming all the way through. But that was the epiphany moment for me. I was like, if I can break this limbic cycle for people and get them into the creative side to perhaps we can, or perhaps this should go in a different way, then we were starting to get really great results because it was far more collaborative for everybody and they weren't afraid to actually do it.
Doug, man, I've been around motivational training and trainers now 40 years, and Tony Robbins is probably the most universally loved and hated of the whole bunch.
Sure.
Tell me about your time with him and what he left you with.
So I learned a lot from Tony. I'm very grateful I had that experience. I kind of pinched myself when it first started happening because Tony was there was a time in my life where I was just frustrated. Nothing was really going right. And then it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm watching television and this big guy with this, big teeth came on and he's like, "Hey, I'm Tony Robbins, and here's my personal power 2 course." And or personal power, I think it was then. And I'm like sitting there going, "Well, I've spent $250 on stupider ideas than this." So I ordered the series and I went through it, and it literally started reframing how I started thinking. When I got to work with him, I got to observe him, and I would be able to observe like when he was on stage, for example. And I would go to a Tony Robbins event, me personally, not just for the content and the fun and all the shift, but I learned from him from what's he doing on stage and how is he positioning here. And he's a master at doing that. I think Tony's one of the best, if not the best salespeople in the world when it comes down to it. He's got all the characteristics from caring all the way to, the empathy to the expertise, and knows how to disengage when it's not right for people, and knows how to actually help them cross that barrier of fear into that buying confidence area. So I learned a lot of that from Tony by watching him while I was there. And I think the single most transformative lesson from that experience was, he used to always talk about CANI, constant and never ending improvement. And constant and never ending improvement is really what I built my life on, because another gentleman, Alan Weiss, said to me one day, "Doug, if you'd mathematically do the numbers 1% better every day, in 70 days, you're twice as good." And so I went out and I brought it out all year long. And I said, well, that's 36, 37x. So if we just get incrementally better every day, that's why I tell people, look, this is probably going to take you twice as long as you figure it's going to, and maybe cost you twice as much as you figure. But if you get better at it every single day, then you will prevail. The reason people don't get what they want most of the time is because they quit. And so that's what I learned from Tony was, I'm still grateful to this day to have had that experience.
One of the things I find when people I've come from corporate space, and so you have sessions where, hi, this is a way to address something, whether it's an improvement piece, way to manage people, etc. And you sit there and whether it's 1 hour or it's an 8 hour session, and then you walk away, everything's fresh in your mind. And then as time wears on, it just kind of tapers down. Right.
Yeah.
There's a bit of some things might still latch. How do you sustain, like, you have say a Tony Robbins event, right? It's high energy, you're in it. You're in the moment, you got the flow. 2 weeks down pipe, how do how do you hold on to enough that you can have that incremental change? What do you do to make that stick?
Well, it's repetition, right? It's repetition to ad nauseum, really, when it comes down to it. So that's where a lot of people kind of drop the process. And so because we retain we'll lose half of what we learned within, a couple of days, right? We just won't remember. If anybody's like, no, I have the greatest memory, that's cool. You're better than most. But if I said to you, today is the 12th of November, what did you have for lunch the 3rd of November? Most people couldn't recall that quickly. But if you reminded yourself, hey, I had whatever for lunch, fish for lunch on every day, you reminded yourself and somebody asked you that question, you'd be able to recall it very quickly. So when you leave an event like that, or if you leave, whatever you're trying to learn something, don't just put it down and then just move on to the next thing. You want to go back and what are the lessons I've learned from here and how do I apply that? And that's why accountability is really important in life for all of us, because we show up, suit up, and do the deal over and over and over and over again. And that's how to reinforce that. So, when I was in the military, for example, when you first pick up, the weapon and back then we had steel helmets, right? So you stick your helmet, they call it a steel pot. So you stick it on your head and it is so heavy, like your neck is bobbling around like crazy. You look like one of those little dogs in the back of a window where the neck is, going up and down. Not real dogs, folks, the little toy dog. And, but by your 6th week, you're walking around and going, I don't even feel this thing, it's on your head. but you're no longer bobbling around. That's because you've been training your neck every day, your muscles to get stronger and stronger. It's the same process. They used to do that with our weapons. I mean, we would disassemble and reassemble those weapons in rain, snow, sleet, hail, freezing weather, hot weather, in every situation. And, I could pull that apart and put it back together, within very, very short period of time. And the reason you do that is because that practice of repetition commits it to habit, commits it to memory, so that when you need to be able to do it, you're reflexive, not actually having to think through it. And so when you're in sales and selling or building a business and you know what to do, somebody says something, you're like, oh, I've heard this 15 times. Here's how I'm going to handle this coming back. You're confident about it. And that's what creates this confidence is repetition and accountability.
I have found in both being in sales and teaching sales is there's a search for a client, find a client, service a client, bill a client, start over and hate your life that seems to be endless. And if you really broke that code, I need to marry you. Yeah.
Personally, I don't think my wife would allow it, even though you're a cute guy, right?
Wrong podcast. Wrong podcast.
That's funny. So, here's the thing. Now the question is, do you hate your life because you're in this constant up and down swing? So if that's the case, the way out of this is you've got to create what we call high performing activities that are automated. In other words, master prospectors will always outsell the master closers, and master prospectors always have an abundance of leads that are qualified coming through to them. If in most cases, when people are not feeling happy about, because they're having peaks and valleys in their income, the way to smooth that out is we've got to think about a lead as a wave coming into the shore. But the wave starts way out somewhere in the lake or the sea or wherever. And the more you can have those waves come in at a steady repetition, then you will not feel the bite of that process. What most people don't do is they don't schedule out time to force the prospecting to happen. And so what ends up happening is they see highs and lows in their income cycle because let's say an average consulting deal or takes, 3 months to close, right? Just from the time you initiate it to 3 months. Well, that means for every 3 months, you're not going to see something unless you have something that started within the cycle that drops in the third week of the third month, if you will. I mean, third week of that series of the 12 weeks, right? So that's why we want to have steady, steady, steady prospecting. And we recommend that you have 6 new ways over a year that you turn those into high performing activities, i.e., those are the producing results, and then find ways to automate those activities as much as possible, at least on the front end, so that you can have qualified conversations, which will lead to more selling and more sales.
So this whole model is math based. So if a company is starting out and they're sitting back going, okay, I'm selling widgets or I'm selling a service, I'm a coach. What should they look at from a math perspective, going to the numbers? What should they focus on first as a start point?
Well, if we're talking about independent professionals, Bernie, like, coach or consultant or something like that, we want to look at the number of outreaches we're making every single day to start out first. I mean, the first place to start is the real truthful number. What do you actually want? Because most people are really not clear on that. And then what's our cost per sale and what's it cost? How much do we want to take home? Really, that's what we want to figure out. And then build a plan around that. But once you're there, if you just measure how many outbound activities or outbound reaches you're doing, right? I.e., I'm reaching out to somebody. Well, okay, great. How many of those outreaches results in a connection? And how many of those connections returns a positive response? And how many of those positive responses go into appointments? How many of those appointments actually become sales? How many of those sales become follow-up sales? How many of those follow-up sales or sales becomes an increased buying frequency where they buy from you more than once, or you get a referral from and expand the sale through your existing relationship, or you increase the transactional value by selling them something else at the time of sale, or you upsell them or something of that nature. And, how many times are you following up to re-engage that process? If we just kind of focus on those metrics alone, those start to tell you a story. So, if you're outreaching a lot, let's say you're outreaching 300 times a day. through automated methodologies, through making phone calls, but your connection rate is near zero. Well, there's a reason for that. And we've got to investigate what that process, what is the reason? Maybe it is the process we're using. Maybe we don't have our ideal right fit buyer. Maybe our messaging is so terrible that, we're reaching out for, sword lessons, and no one's interested in, or we're reaching out for fencing, let's say, right? And there's, we're intending to do sword lessons, but nobody's responding to us because they're looking for, picket fencing, right? It's the same word, if you will. So
I knew you were going to bring it back to that. I had already jumped that fence. Being from Eastern Ontario, I had already gone there.
That fence, you already jumped it? Oh, double pun. Oh, bad, Wayne. Bad.
That's awesome, guys. Yeah, I mean, there's reasons. Like if we had these connections and we got a lot of connections, but they're all negative responses, let's say. Well, we know that our messaging but let's say we got a lot of positive responses, but we couldn't get any appointments or we get our appointment setting ratios low. Well, again, it might be in the messaging. I had a business called Telecom Auditing Group where we would audit phone bills and consult on the telecommunication space. We averaged 24.5% savings across the board for our clients, not changing carriers. I just talked with AT&T at the time or talked with MCI at the time. That's how long this was, if those of you remember MCI, and I would readjust their bill because there's always billing errors and mistakes. But we were only getting like 1 in 5 who were actually converting with the message, hey, I'll do all of this. You don't have to pay me. We just take a percentage of the savings. It was driving me crazy because I'm like, who wouldn't want to take their $10,000 a month bill down to $7,500 a month, right? And so one day I started asking questions of people who didn't buy, and then I started calling people and saying, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm doing marketing research. This is what I do. Tell me why you wouldn't buy this. And they all started telling me the same things. Well, anytime you make billing changes on our phone bill, sometimes that creates a service interruption and we would lose more money by the service interruption than we'd save on the phone bill, so to speak. Or, I'm a hospital and if you knock down our telecommunications, we have government regulations that are got, all these things were coming up. And I'm like, okay. So then what I did is I led with a different line and I came out of the gate saying, if I didn't knock you out of service at a guaranteed rate of 99.975% of the time, and I could reduce your phone bill by 24.5%, would you want to talk about this? My close rate went from 20% to 71%.
Wow.
And so this is the reason you measure these ratios, because the ratios start to tell you a story on how you can improve and optimize the process.
I find interesting is that you have things you've learned where there's low hanging fruit. Some of our listeners have ADD. They only give us 7 seconds. So if you
Yep.
only are going to give us 7 seconds, tell me a low cost sales improvement strategy or no cost sales improvement strategy that they could put in immediately and see 30% improvement.
Well, I can't guarantee 30%, but I can guarantee improvement, right? So most people are neglecting two major factors in that regard. Number one, they're dormant clients. People have bought from them and they haven't re-engaged those clients in a long time. Just go back to your dormant clients and start talking to them. People who have bought from you in the past that you frankly haven't been communicating with. There are sales sitting there for you in most cases. The second thing is bloody well follow up, as it's said in England, right? So, because most people are not following up. In fact, statistically, half the people don't follow up with people even after a meeting, which is crazy. So, just improve your follow up ratios and your skills, and you'll pick up business. And this is notorious in certain industries here in the US, like the trades business for sure, like any service based, roofing company, air conditioning company, anything like that. They just, I don't know, they just feel like they don't need to do it because maybe they got enough business coming in for some of these people. But when you're doing ridiculous numbers like 17 quotes and you're not following up on these quotes and half of them would close. And, going back to your original question, Wayne, why would I wake up every day and hate my life, so to speak? Well, maybe if you just followed up, folks, you wouldn't have to have that, you'd close more, right? Because follow up is a constructive, personal need of human beings. In other words, we all want to feel like we matter. And so follow up is a common courtesy, guys, I used to do this thing live. I'd be on in an audience, and I'd say to the women in the audience, I'd say, "You just went out on the perfect date. And how long does that person that you went out on the perfect date have to call you before they are burnt toast?" Number one answer was within 24 hours. Right. And I actually had women sometimes, evidently they've had some trauma around this, but they would stand up. I've had a couple stand up and go, "I didn't have a guy call me for 5 days. If he called me now, I'd toss him off a bridge." Right? So it's like, okay. So it's common courtesy. It shows you care. Those are two quick things you can do: dormant clients and improve your follow up.
You ever find that people oversell features and as opposed to just here's the value?
Yeah, I think they oversell them because they have nothing else, Bernie. Like they're trying to sell versus listening to the person, listening to the company, listening to the people. If you're doing a multi-person sale, they cue in on one person. They go, "Oh yeah, well, I would like X," and then they go, "Oh, this feature of this, and this feature of that, and this feature of this," and right. But they're never asking, what does this feature actually do or mean to you? What are you actually looking to accomplish? What is the end goal? What's the problem here we're trying to solve? What's the
Yeah.
opportunity we're trying to gain? And so, yeah, they sell features because they don't understand the basics of human communication, which is, two people in a conversation is a dialogue. One person is a monologue. There are times that features are important to even bring forth, but most of the time, um, when I'm selling, especially, I'm not even talking about features unless we're talking about the value, but one step further. What does the value actually mean to them? What's the perception of their value of the value? That's what they
Yeah.
buy.
So when you have, because in the bio, there's something about 4,000% in 6 months. So on a product line, obviously something shifted gears. What were a couple of things that you did that made that light bulb pop, and then all of a sudden, stream up like an F-16 taking off from straight up?
Yeah, I looked at the data, number one. So, so they had a product set called the Sales Mastery System, and they were selling 8 of those a month, and they were selling it for, if I recall correctly, it was $8.99, so $900 ish, somewhere around there. I was like, why are we only selling 9 of these things? Like it made no sense, or 8 of these things a month. Made no sense to me. So I looked at the data and I could see that on our leads that were coming through, that the majority of the companies coming through were under $300,000, and they were pitching them all a $4,000 program, and less than 1% of those $300,000 companies were actually buying the $4,000 program. All of the companies that bought it was $800 program. All of the companies that bought that $899 program were under 300,000. So I started asking myself this question: why are we pitching $4,000 programs to people who are buying at less than 1%, and 70% of our lead base is under $300,000? This is the value in looking at the data, because then you can start to ask questions that tell you the story. So just like I did in the telecom business, I called up the clients that didn't buy, and I was calling up people who could potentially buy this, and I'd said, why didn't you buy? Right? And they all told me this very similar thing. I just don't want another digital course. And back then it was on DVD. I don't want another DVD course with workbooks. I really want to talk to a human being. And so I said, well, tell me what the price point was that you were thinking. And they'd say, well, I love the price point. I could go higher. So, around $1,500 or so US, right? That's what they were telling me. And I said, okay, great. Well, tell you what, if I put some group coaching in here, 6 weeks of group coaching, would that be a benefit? You'd be able to come every single week and talk to a human being and get everything answered. And they said, sure. So I put it together and I raised the price to $1,450. And in our first week, not first week, in our first month, now remember, they only sold 8 a month on average. In our first month, we sold 108 of them. In our second month, we sold 235. In our third month, we sold 353, if I remember correctly. In our fourth month, we sold almost 500. Now remember, so we've got 500 sales going on now at $1,450 versus 8 sales at $900. And it just kept going. So, some months we were up in the 600s, and it just kept going up and up and up. And it was all because I looked at the data and I just started asking questions. That literally made, tens of millions of dollars over time in the process. So that's how that product set came about and how that increase of I think the number was 4,152% on average, on the increase.
You strike that you're roughly the same age as me. That's a guess, but I'm guessing you were in that raised in the 60s. Y- All of us remember being on a telephone tree where you heard an automated voice and you pressed buttons and you did magic things and you hoped that death would come and that it would release you from this call.
Yeah.
And now we talk to consultants and they're telling the truth that automation is the future. What the switch where somebody dreaded AI and phone trees to, man, this will really help me build business and make the client happier? What flipped that switch and how are you a part of that?
So it's an awesome question, Wayne, because I'm not so sure that the last part of that point of the question is actually true. It makes the client happier, right? It's, I mean, we all get stuck. I mean, I just had the hospitals are doing this. Drives me crazy, right? You get stuck in these branching trees and you're not feeling well. And it's like, oh, well, fill out this form and do this up front and do that up front. And it's all automated. They're like trying to do the automation. And it's like, well, I have a question. And it's like, yeah, do this, do that, right? So I'm not so sure that walking through the grocery aisle and having an AI bot, not be there to help you, human being, when you can't ring through, you know, I don't know, cucumbers or something, right? I mean, it's like, but the reason that people are doing this is because when you look at profit in any company, you look at raising revenues and profits. If you can lower expense, then you get higher profitability, just numerically, right? Human beings working are expensive. And so you put something in that works 24 hours a day, doesn't complain, doesn't get sick, doesn't, whatever, and can do those routine jobs. You now increase your productivity, maybe, but you certainly increased your profit. And so I think people now are more used to doing this because it's forced upon them, but I don't really think most people still, unless it's a very simple exchange, they don't really, what causes this? The internet, right? The internet, when the internet came about, it made it proliferated the ability to find information, and then that information is now synthesized into what people are looking for, and then people are getting the experience they want. And I personally think it is kind of creating a hell of a lot of tension in the world for people that they don't necessarily want. I think the convenience of it when it works is great, but when you can't get an airline flight out and you got to talk to a machine who keeps routing you round and round and round, or ask you for this piece of information and what's your frequent flyer number, and you don't even have it and it won't let you go further. I don't think that's happened, but I think a lot of these companies that are really embracing this in that mass manner, they look at it as, okay, if we lose 4,000 clients today, but we gain 4,500, we're more profitable, right? So I think it just depends on the industry that you're using it in. The medical doctors, when you're walking in now, they're like, can we record this conversation so AI can transcribe it and stick it in the notes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? They get a lot of pushback on that right now. I understand it, so I don't care personally, but I think this constant, instant gratification thing is just amping up the world where people are more stressed and stressed and stressed. And, I sound like I'm on my soapbox, maybe complaining, but the reality is you keep amping up the stress and, you add inflation on top of the stress and all these things that are happening. People get tense and they start doing things like driving 40 miles an hour over the speed limit, as a normal thing, right? That type of thing. So I'm a big proponent of AI, but I also think that it needs to be actually in check. And again, why don't we ask the people what they want versus trying to stuff it down their throats? And AI is nothing to fear. It's just another technology. I mean, you talked about when we were in the 60s, you had this automated thing that you get stuck in, right? And, you'd be on hold with AT&T for 45 minutes trying to get something resolved. I think there's a place for all of this, but, prior to the automated phone, I mean, people thought television was never going to be, what it is today. Movie theaters were the biggest thing, but now they're not because streaming is, right? So it's like it's just another technology. The ATM took 13 years for people to actually go, okay, this won't eat my money, right? So I think in time, when the AI kind of shakes itself out, we're fortunately or unfortunately in that time where it's being all shaken up at this point. There's no way I'm getting in a self-driving car at this point. I don't trust it, right? Personally. Um, and it's been shown it's already run people over and because it just, but in time, I think that self-driving cars will probably become the standard, right? We'll see. I hope I'm answering your question.
Well, you can't leave me here, Doug. You've laid it out clearly. There are pain points, and we both knew that. But tell me you have a solution, and I don't want to mispronounce it, so you're going to pronounce it. Tell me how Vibey thing is going to fix this.
So Vibitno, yeah. So Vibitno. Okay, so my wife, she is originally born in Poland, and I was looking for the URL, You Matter. So youmatter.com. But to buy that URL was insanely priced and it was being used. And so I'm like, there's got to be like, when we were growing up, like they used to use words for like automobiles. They take them from like another language, Spanish usually, like the Zephyr, whatever. And I was like, there's got to be another language that can say you matter, right? Well, Vibitno is a Slavic term that means you're important or you matter. And so that's why I took it. Now, you always have to test things, right? To see if they stick or not. And so people always they're having challenges saying the word, especially now, anybody from Eastern Europe is like, oh, I get it. But our primary audience is in North America at this point. So we're probably going to change the name of that just so especially for the Americans, and or North America in general. But what that is a automated follow-up, proactive, relevant, meaningful follow-up system. What does that all mean? That means the system learns about us and it actually will create messages between us that are relevant. Like, I know you're in Ontario. I know, you're in Ottawa. We talked about the hockey a bit, right? So I can get some points of interest. And what Babitno will do is analyze that and say, hey, you haven't talked to Wayne in, you know, 3 weeks. Let's reach out to Wayne and let's talk about Ontario and what might be happening in Ontario at this point, right? Like I won't bring this up, but secretly I went to the Boston Bruins Toronto Maple Leafs game last night, right? And so, I wouldn't bring that up because Toronto didn't win, right? But if Toronto had won the last two games, I might bring that up in our conversation because knowing if you like the Maple Leafs or whatever, then the system would recognize that and say, oh, okay, this is a good conversation to have. I was just thinking about you, Wayne. I was thinking, the Maple Leafs and Bruins played last night. The Bruins, congratulations to your team, that type of thing. It just keeps us relevant and fresh, our relationship up to date, right? And we all know we went to school with certain people for 12 years, some of us, and we stopped talking to one another after that conversation. But then as life goes on, maybe you're on, what used to be called Facebook, now called Meta or some social media platform. And you're like, I wonder how Bernie's doing. I haven't talked to Bernie in, Jesus, 14 years, right? Hey, Bernie, this is Doug from school. I'm sorry we lost track of one another. How you doing? And Bernie might reach back, oh, hey, Doug, it's good to hear from you, right? We re-engage, by the way, folks, dormant clients, right? You go back, not that Bernie is a dormant client, but this is all you do, right? You reach back out to him. And so Bernie and I reestablished that relationship. Now, if we don't talk to one another for 6 years, nothing's going to come out of that relationship, but just a thing. But imagine if you had a system now that said, okay, you're re-engaged with Bernie every whatever time frame, every 6 weeks, every 2 months. You're just going to reach out to Bernie with something that's relevant to him. Well, guess what? I can pull Bernie's LinkedIn profile and look at that. I can look at his social media. He might have articles out there. There's all kinds of things that we could do. And then over time, I'm building a process. Bernie might say, oh, geez, I have this that happened in my life, or that happened in my life. And we all want to know the other person cares about us. So it will queue up the message and say, hey, do you want to send this to Bernie or send this to Wayne? Or would you just like for me to remind them of certain days in their lives that are special? Maybe your birthday's coming up and it's like, hey guys, So it was a way to stay in contact with people in a way that mattered to them. That was the whole idea behind it. And yes, Wayne, we use AI in the system too, as well. So that is the process. And that's why I developed it. Well, the reason I developed it is because I went on vacation one time and lost $125,000 sale.
Ow.
My oldest daughter became ill while we were on vacation. And I was working for a company at the time, and I asked the company, I said, I can't get back for 3 days. We took her to the hospital, and they're like, don't worry, we'll cover all your calls. We'll cover all your mail. We'll cover all your snail mail, all that. And when I got back, my email box was jammed. My phone was jammed. My snail mail was overflowing onto the floor. Right. And I was the top rep in this company at that time. And, on one of my voicemail messages, like some gentleman was calling me for 4 days straight. Doug, where are you? I want to buy from you. I want to buy from you. I picked up the phone. I called him and he said, geez, I said, I'll be right over. He goes, well, sorry, man. My CEO was pressuring me to make this decision. We went with, he said the name was Lightship. I'm like, when did you talk to Lightship? That we were our number one competitor. He goes, well, they cold called me 4 days ago. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. We have been working for 3.5 months on this deal together. So I lost $125,000 sale. And back then that commission to me was $25,000. And my vacation cost me $4,400, if I remember correctly. So it literally cost me $29,400 to go on vacation. And I said, never, 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 never again, because I'm not the only one going through this. Right. So that's what I developed it for.
Doug, if someone is listening to this story, listening to this podcast, they're going, listen, I want to reach out to Doug. I want to get Vibitno in my space. First off, what type of budget? Second off, how do they reach you? And third off, do you have a book or podcast out there also?
Yeah. And thanks for asking all those questions. The first thing is, Vibitno is a thing that, think about it costing around $97 a month, right? Because that's about what it costs. I mean, we're actually doing lifetime memberships on Vibitno because we're finding that people who are in this, they're like, I love this thing. And it's like, all right, so let's put some more enhancements in there and let's help. You want to help us, we'll help you. Here's a lifetime login, fixed cost, boom, right? And then that goes to the development of the new features and stuff. If they want to get a hold of me, probably the best way is email. Actually, it's Doug at CEO Sales Strategies, plural on both of those.com. So Doug at CEOsalesstrategies.com. Some people reach out to me on LinkedIn at Doug Brown. And let's see what else. So you asked those two questions. Oh, the podcast of the book. I wrote a book called Win-Win Selling: Unlocking the Power of Profitability by Resolving Objections. To my delight, it went to number one seller in, I think, 4 or 5 countries. And it's all about the psychology and philosophy on how to resolve objections, no matter what objection it is. So instead of giving people like, if they say this, say that, right? That type of thing. It's about the psychology of why they're saying that and how you can say whatever you need to say. And the words don't always have to be perfect, but you can still get to that thing. So it's a whole process on how to resolve those. And then I have a podcast called the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast.
A coincidence.
Yeah. Didn't take a lot of thought on that one, right? I started that podcast it's called the Double Dog Dare. It comes from the movie Ralphie and the Christmas movie or whatever. A lot of my friends were like, hey, listen, you have all this experience. Why don't you just share it on a podcast? And I'm like, why? And they're like, because people need to know this information. And I said, okay, but I'm not doing a podcast. And then one of my friends said, I double dog dare you to do the best podcast in the world, right? And I'm like, all right, put your money up where your mouth is, and all that stuff. And we made a little bet. And in our first year, the podcast just started shooting up because what I did is just like you guys, I brought real people on. And my criteria was you had to build at least a $5 million and up company. And we're going to talk about the good things you did. And we're also going to talk about the hard times and the bad things that happened and how you got out of both of those, what you learned from those. And it was pretty successful thing. My friend does no longer double dare me on certain things at this point.
Why?
So, I mean, it's great. I had like very successful entrepreneurs on there. I actually, Brian Scudamore from Canada, 1-800 got junk. He was on the podcast. Super nice guy, smart guy. We were joking because I actually had the idea of 1-800 got junk before he did, but I never put it into play. And he said that to me. He goes, "Yeah, there's a difference." I said, I believe I know what you're going to say. And he goes, "Well, I put it into play. You didn't." So that's the thing. So touche, Brian. So it's those are great ways of getting a hold of me. If they want the book, they can go to winwinsellingbook.com. Guys, can I give away a free gift on this for your audience?
Certainly.
Absolutely.
I did this whole, it's a video course, but it's kind of a concise video course, but it's on what we call the 2X methodology, which is really how do you double your sales predictably with metrics. And they can get it at ceosalesstrategies.com/2 and X. So it's just CEO Sales Strategies /2X. They exchange their name and email address, but they get a very robust course on how to do this. And it's not a long course, because what I've learned over time is 13% of people actually, even if it's a long course, only 13% will actually watch it through. Right. So we shortened up the course into more of a mini course, give you just what you need to have to, get things going. And, so I'd like to give that away if that's good. So thank you, guys.
Doug Brown, I want to say thank you so much for sharing a wealth of information, everything from Vibitno, the podcast information, the book, and, the course, that you're offering to the listeners. I like to say thank you to Wayne Pratt to being a co-host. And you, especially you, the Knack for Business listeners, because without you, then what's the point, right? And so just remember, Doug helps business owners replace the unpredictable sales with reliable, repeatable revenue using simple. I'm going to redo that again because I just rolled out of my tongue a little sideways. Doug helps business owners replace the unpredictable sales with reliable and repeatable revenue using simple, measurable systems that remove the stress from selling. Because if you're stressed, then you're not going to make good choices. Right? And he's passionate about it. So reach out to him.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.